All right, hello everybody. My name is Alia Boubart. I'm the curator here at the Bill Reid Gallery of Northwest Coast Art. I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here this evening for our panel discussion with these amazing artists and Eliot White-Hill, who is our guest curator of the exhibition, Every River Has a Mouth, the Visual Languages That Connect Us. So this evening will be a panel between 4 of the featured artists in the exhibition, talking more about their own practices as artists, but also relating to the themes of the exhibition, which is featured here at the gallery until February of next year. Just before we get started, I do want to acknowledge the Bill Reid Gallery is located on the unceded and ancestral territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, and we are so grateful and honored to be doing our work within these beautiful territories. So I will now just pass it along to Eliot, and he'll get us started, and we'll just dive into it. So thank you.
Thank you, Alia. Osiamna siaya, Anthapek, Kwulasultun, Tanitsanak Snanemoch, Heights Ebka Kwanzalabs Kakipa Tanakwel. Hello, everyone. My name is Eliot White-Hill Kwulasultun, and I'm an artist and storyteller from the Snanemoch First Nation in Nanaimo. I'm really grateful to be here with you all today. And it's been such a privilege to get to work on this show as the guest curator with Alia and to bring together this incredible group of artists who we have a few of here tonight. And so kind of off the bat, I want to give a little bit of an overview of the curation of this show and what the show's about. So Every River Has a Mouth is an exhibit of Salish art and really talking about the visual languages that connect us as Coast Salish, as interior Salish people. And it's just so significant to have representation of Salish art here in Vancouver on the territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. And it's really significant to have this here at the Bill Reid Gallery. You know, when Alia and I started working on this show 2 years ago, she first identified that, it's been since 2017 was the last show of Salish art here at the Bill Reid Gallery, and it's been too long, So she identified that as a major goal, and we started working on this. And, we're in the Coast Salish territory, but I think that, there's been this big history of disrespect and erasure of Coast Salish art within our territories. But, when Salish art is given the platform, I think that not often enough has the connection between coast and interior Salish been talked about. That's been talked about even less. So that was a big thing that we wanted to address and to create this platform for all of us to be here and to share our art. And, the title, Every River Has a Mouth, talks about that connection that we have, that our cultures flow on the rivers, our languages flow on the rivers. And it comes from my learning of my language, Halkaminam, and how I learned that our language is more connected to languages along the Fraser River than it is to people north and south of us on Vancouver Island in Snanemoch. And that was really profound to learn. And it's because of the way that our ancestors traveled throughout the land and were interrelated. And so that's where the title comes from, and thinking about the river as a metaphor for our cultures and our visual languages. And the title, I learned actually that every river doesn't actually have a mouth. Some of them just naturally go away into the ground, or, but so that's the title, and that's a little bit about the show. So,
their own way.
Yeah, Uncle Larry, when he was here at the opening, he said that the Fraser River has 3 mouths, and he wasn't sure which one was the biggest. So, yeah, so. I'd really love for each of the artists to introduce themselves, and then we'll kind of go through the questions that we have. Awesome.
Hello, everyone. My name is Manuel Axel Strain, and I'm a member of the Musqueam First Nation. My father is Eric Strain, and his mother is Helen Point, and her parents are Tony Point of Musqueam First Nation and Tina Cole of the Squamish First Nation. My mother is Tracy Eustache. She comes from the Secwepemc and Syilx nations, specifically the places of Chuchua and Inkamapalux. Inkamapalux is at the head of the Okanagan Lake, and Chuchua is on the North Thompson River. And her parents were Harold Eustache and Marie Lewis. and their parents were Rose Lewis, Lee Goffredson, and Ben Lewis. And my grandpa Harold's parents were Christine Eustache and Manuel Eustache, who I'm named after. I also have the name Suklest, which comes from my great-great-grandfather in Chuchua, who had that name before I did. Now, that's a very lengthy introduction. And I was once told by a dear uncle that recently passed that my great-great-grandfather, when introducing himself, at times would name 16 generations before him. And that was to maintain the integrity of our oral tradition. So I'll leave it there.
Get ready for 20 generation introduction. No, I'll keep it a little shorter. My name is James Nuhkelos Kwulasultun Harry. I share the name Kwulasultun with my dad. I was given Nuhkelos at birth. My dad picked me up, looked at me, and he thought to himself in his head, "Oh, he looks really old." And then my mom said, "He looks really old." He's like, "Oh my God. Okay, we got to figure out a name that kind of means old person or old wise one." And so that's what Nuhkelos means, is old wise one. And Kwulasultun, I was given, we had a naming ceremony when I was 16, and he chose to pass on his ancestral name to me. So I carry that name with him, and so I'm actually from the Squamish Nation and Namgis Nation on my grandmother's side. I come from a family of artists, carvers, painters, and just kind of carrying on the tradition of both in some ways that I can. And I'll leave it on that.
Hello, I'm Ashkait, Kathwa'a, and Chashquimchin Squatchich, Dilwat Mufkan. I said hello, good day. It's lovely to be here with you all. My Ukwamuk name is Quimchin, a name given to me by my late grandmother, Teresa Atsi Pascal. My English name is Sydney, and I'm from the Iwat Nation, which is just a couple hours north of here in the Whistler and Pemberton Valley area. My mom is Maria May Pascal. My great-grandma is May Pascal. And I guess that's me, and I'll pass it to Grace.
I'd square Anthapat Grace Edwards, Tanitsanas Nawasi Cowichan. Good day, everybody. My name is Grace Edwards. I come from the Snotnawas First Nation on my father's side, Richard Edwards, and I come from the Cowichan tribes from my mother's side, Mary Lou Edwards. It's good to be here with everybody. Thank you.
We'll keep one of those over there.
Oh, I was going to have a baton.
Awesome. So we'll start with the first question, and maybe we'll start with Grace, and then we'll come this way. So how does your art practice engage with the sense of connection to place and culture?
Wow, that's a good question. I feel like when it comes to the way that I develop my paintings in relation to like the land and the culture, I always have to kind of look back on my own personal experiences and instances. So I think in relation to my painting, it was this big. I had to really look back on my own kind of feelings with the river, with the water, with the pathways that like I'm really used to. And a lot of it, there was only ever good memories. There was some times where I had to fill in the blanks by going to like my father, Richard Edwards, who knows so much more than I do about the waterways just because he's older. But yeah, in recent times, just the way that I've been developing, the way that I'm kind of creating my own style or looking at other contemporary styles of form line, it's very movement based as well, of what I'm visually seeing or kind of spiritually feeling at the same time. Like, what am I envisioning? How does water and smoke or just like the spiritual sensation of like ancestors being around us, like look and feel like. And that's kind of how I've been developing my style and kind of relating to my culture as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Can you repeat the question again?
Yeah, it's how does your art practice engage with a sense of connection to place and culture?
I feel like most of my work up until now has always been searching for a sense of belonging through place and culture, or just working through like a loss of sense of belonging to place and culture and trying to gain that back through series of events that's happened to like our family and community, and one of them being the 60 Scoop that my mother and grandmother were both part of, and that's a big part of the 2 videos works that I have here. And so I feel like for me personally, my work connects to the sense of belonging with place and culture by going to these places. And it's kind of just like a full circle moment, I guess, for me, because Vancouver is originally where my mom was displaced and then taken to the island, which we didn't know till 25 years later. So just even imagining, like thinking about waterways and how we can like measure the water and distance in between places, between each other, and how even back when I think of waterways, we would talk about people who could speak across water. You could send messages to each other. And so for me, water's been really a place where I've processed these thoughts and feelings, and then moving into the work I have here, it's kind of moved into more into sharing memories that are created now in like the present time, and just yeah, it's just interesting to think how in the end how all these waterways are places of memory and witnesses to the stories that we share.
Thank you. Yeah.
I guess, yeah, for me, I've always, like, I mean, I definitely feel a tremendous sense of responsibility in, dismantling a lot of things that are happening, even within my own nation. With Squamish, we are a mix of Namgis, Kwakwaka'wakw, Coast Salish people. Goes much further. There's a lot more intertwined with that in terms of just the identity of our people. And I think that you go back with the history of Vancouver and the connection that my people might have had with Vancouver, speaking specifically from art and culture lens, is that there's been a tremendous pressure on these communities to focus on form line design, art that is, yes, from our nation, because we have Kwaguth. I'm actually Namgis on my grandmother's side, so I can practice form line. But from my dad's generation, he has really focused on really presenting only Coast Salish identity forward, because we're so underrepresented on our own territory. So really, I'm just kind of like working off of the work that he's done in my own way. And I speak specifically to my nation because I just want to give a little bit of context behind the amount of people that practice. Is that we actually have 350 people registered within the Squamish Nation as artists in our business directory of artists that you can select from. And only there's about eight of us that are practicing Coast Salish art and culture in our nation. And so, largely due to, you think back about even where we're sitting now with Bill Reed being such a influence of formline globally, about how there's been this desire to kind of, people from around the world think of the Pacific Northwest as formline, and I think there's a lot of work as Coast Salish people that we have to undo, because this is our territory and we need to kind of focus on our territory and our identity. So that's kind of like the urgency that I feel that we need to focus on, and largely why I think this tremendous sense of responsibility is upon our shoulders in our own way as artists, as cultural producers, that we are communicating who we are while respecting the past, but pushing the needle forward as well as, and I think this is true to every, if you think of art throughout history, it's always done the thing of like pushing the culture forward and yeah, I feel like we might cover more of that today, but that's kind of how I feel about like culture and place in this territory, and yeah.
Well,
Thanks,
thank
James.
you all for sharing. I really appreciate the answers you provided to everyone. As I was sitting and listening to every single person here and reflecting upon this question and the name of the show, I started to imagine place as something that we consider as a form of intelligence. And I say that because, especially hearing the other panelists speak, I thought about the feelings of being in water or touching a rock or putting our feet on the ground like grass or whatever it is, moss. And when I imagine those things, I imagine them as a form of intelligence. And I think I'm fascinated by imagining this as a form of intelligence because the greatest thing technologically across the globe I think we're all contending with is artificial intelligence. So when I imagine place as something I'm connected to, I try to root it in that sense of intelligence as something that I can speak to and I can learn from, something that I can go to inspire me, and that often will even bring the words out of my mouth in a weird way. Because as someone of this land, I imagine that I'm an embodiment of that land. So as we speak as part of that land. So when I look at my painting, I think about the river, and what inspired me was looking at it and talking to it and asking it for help and just saying, I need help making my image today. How can you help me? And then the bubbles formed. They were already there, I just noticed them. And those bubbles formed the concentric circles around the face and the portrait. So that's how I imagine place, is something we're all connected to. Every single one of you has a place you're all connected to. And for many of you, that place might not be where your ancestors come from. And I'm here to say that's okay, because a lot of that is beyond our control. We have a phrase in our language, and it roughly translates to all are welcome here. And that's mindset has created this city, I believe, over time, is the generosity of the Coast Salish people.
Awesome. Thank you, Manny. Yeah, one thing with this show that I feel we really wanted to celebrate was the wide range of practices that all the artists have. That as James was kind of saying, there's so much expectation placed on us as Indigenous artists of what we should make, that we should be working in certain materials, and really like a driving thing for this show was to push back against that and to show people that Salish art is not what you think it is, and it doesn't have to be what you think it is. That the artists are working across such a wide range of mediums, across weaving and sculpture and painting and video installation, and that I really wanted people to come to this show and to learn something new about what Salish art is, and to look at the work that these incredible artists are doing and to learn from them and to celebrate that. And so it's been really exciting to work with everybody and to help create that platform for Salish art. And this is such a small snippet, but it's just such a I admire everybody so much who's here and the work that they do, and I feel that they are carrying our cultures forward, and that the river that is the central kind of metaphor of this show is always renewing itself. The flow changes, the water is never the same water at any given time, and that's how we are as the generations move forward. And that really looking at these instances and different moments of Salish art has been really special. And So I'd love to kind of ask everyone to speak a little bit more about their piece in this show. And maybe we'll start with James and your piece in the show.
Yeah, sure. Actually, it was really interesting to be asked to participate in the show, because normally I haven't really built my whole art practice on showing it in exhibition spaces. It's been public art. So I appreciate you reaching out to kind of showcase what I've been doing out in the world. But public art, the piece I have in the show is called Welcome Gate, which is a piece that I did in Squamish back in 2023. Well, I mean, it actually all started in 2020. And I was approached by the developer who is currently developing on our territory in Squamish. Interesting enough, he wasn't even really thinking about commissioning an Indigenous artist at all in the beginning. Actually, there was a bunch of artists that they were actually considering for the space. But he had seen my work in 2019 that he was a part of witnessing a ceremony around the unveiling of my work in Hamalchison. And that's translates to fast-moving water fish, just here on the North Shore by Lionsgate Bridge. And we had done like an unveiling ceremony and ceremony around the work. And after he'd seen that, he was interested in talking to me about thinking about the space in Squamish. And I just remember not really understanding like the scale at what he was actually thinking about at first. But then when I went up to Squamish, I was invited to think about the space and what that would mean to me as an artist to kind of develop a piece for that location. And actually at the time there was, they hadn't built out the land yet. It was all like at least 70 or 80 feet inland. So they were constantly bringing out earth and land to infill to account for rising sea levels of all things. Is what they're preparing for. But the whole idea kind of around that, I started to think about some of the stories that I talked to elders about, which was the Great Flood. We had our story of the Great Flood 10,000 years ago. It washed our villages out, and we had canoes to link as rafts to escape right by Inchiquite. And so immediately I knew I wanted it to be about the ocean and the mountains and tying into those stories that were passed down. So I knew canoes had to be part of that conversation, but I also wanted the canoes to be kind of like referencing Inchiquite as well. So I know some people kind of criticize it for kind of splitting the canoe in half, but that's not really my intent. My intent was that, we had welcome figures traditionally welcoming people ashore, and, I wanted the gesture to be like welcoming people to shore, but also between the two, you can kind of like see from a vantage point, you can see Inchiquite between the two silhouettes of it. So I really wanted that to be about that conversation piece of how when people are coming to a shore that they're welcomed, but it's doing it in a way that I was sort of thinking about how Coast Salish art can be done in different ways. Like, of course, that project I worked with fabricators that produced the piece, and I worked with over the span of 3 years, and working in materials that weren't necessarily traditional but would withstand the elements, being in such a windy, rainy, right next to the ocean, of course having to think about the longevity of the material. So, all those things that you would have to think about in public art that you might not necessarily have to think about in an exhibition space, but I really liked the idea of bringing in my model for this show that I kind of produced probably over 20 different carvings before I arrived at the final piece. And so what you see in this show is the final piece that I presented as my final idea for that. in relation to the photograph of the final installation. But for me, like, public art has always been that reclamation of space, and I got into it in the first place because I realized that there just wasn't, we had hardly any representation on our own territory, and that's the whole reason I got into public art. And yeah, so I guess we can leave it there. I don't want to keep to going on that.
Right on.
Yeah.
Thanks, James. Yeah. And Sydney, would you like to speak more about your piece in the show?
The piece over there, The Salmon Have Arrived, was a piece I was really excited to make. And it was last summer when I was invited to be part of this exhibition. I just got out of fish camp at Kwulasultun Fish Camp that we share with another nation up in Lillooet. And it was that time that, for the first time in a long time, there was a surge in the numbers of salmon that wasn't expected on the Fraser River. And there was one morning, me and my cousin went out, and everyone was just like jumping for joy because they said the river turned black that morning with salmon. And that's only something I've really heard in story of like my uncle's memories of growing up. And really that wasn't long ago. And in between that time, getting to a point in such a short period where we stopped fishing for several years in hopes that more salmon would come back. And I'm not sure what the exact reason why is we had this surge in numbers, and I don't know how long it will last, but it was such a fun and beautiful moment that I really want to hold on to that and recreate that by using actual salmon skin. I'm used to working with land animals. I'm a hide tanner and was really excited to work with the material that directly connected to that moment. And I did contrast it a bit with, I casted the salmon head in cement. It's kind of just like a small reference to an industrial material, but talking to the industries that are affecting these numbers and our food systems. But yeah, this piece in particular was about the memory of last summer's fish. Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Thank you. And Grace, would you like to speak about your piece?
Sure. My piece, and it was this big. I have to say it in that way because it makes the most sense. It, funny enough, kind of came to mind during like a very, I don't know, busy moment in my life where I haven't been home for like the last 2 years because I'm originally from Vancouver Island. So I haven't really been able to like enjoy my waterways, like the places that I feel very comfortable around and in. But I was thinking about the title, Every River Has a Mouth. And so I started thinking about my own kind of personal thoughts about rivers and where I feel kind of most connected to and what stands out the most for me when I'm at the river. And the only things that kept coming to mind wasn't like the landscape. It wasn't really like one specific moment. It was really about how the stories about rivers or things that happen beside a river come to life in people. I always love hearing stories about my dad and like the many times he's gone out fishing with like his uncles, and even just the stories that I have in my own kind of memory of being and growing up on the river. And I was thinking about when I was younger, I had to do a presentation about fish, I believe. And I remember the one thing that my dad made sure that I shared to my class was to let them know how big of the fish you caught. So he made sure, he showed me, he said, you put your arms out like this, and you show how big that fish was. So for me, it's just like that sense of humor that's like just passed down. That's something that I know for a fact that was taught to my dad. Thinking of mine of just like the uncles that brought him up, they're like the funniest people in the world. But yeah, so for me, it was about storytelling that's connected to rivers and waterways and how it just brings people to life and it, like has an opportunity of kind of connecting us to place, connecting us to our culture and to like our ancestors as well. So yeah, and I also put my own type of spin on it, the way that I kind of used form lines. If I was talking about, you know, or referencing water, I really wanted to take that fluidity into like my form lines. And it was actually very new for me. I don't think I've ever done that before, and it's actually inspired so much of my recent work in the last 6 months to a year now. And yeah, it was also interesting to kind of push the colors in that piece because I didn't want it to be just blue. I didn't want it to feel like the water because I wasn't really referencing the river itself. I'm referencing memories and storing and what does that feel like to me? And it feels vibrant. You know, it feels like an explosion of memories for me. So, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. You want to take this one? It's, can you tell us a little bit more about your piece in the show?
Oh, okay. I just love hearing all these stories. So I forgot what the question was because I was so enamored by the stories. For the painting here, it's at the back. I keep looking at it. I haven't been able to get here, sadly, until today. So it's my first time seeing this iteration of the work. The work was originally conceived as part of an installation at the Richmond Art Gallery. And what we look at, I guess first, we'll dissect that. It's an image of clouds that my father took. It's quite an old photo that he took. And then the overlay, red, I'm really inspired by old pictographs, so I like thinking of pictograph imagery. They're kind of just like the oldest form of emojis in my mind, in some ways. And so I went to the water, as I mentioned earlier, and asked the water for help to help me make this image, and that's just what the water decided it wanted to give that day. I guess now that I'm talking about water, I was thinking a lot about the title, and every river has a mouth, and I think what's more interesting about that title is not necessarily the concept of the mouth of the river, but as the mouth as something that speaks to us, that the river it can speak to all of us. And I think contextually, maybe that's more inspiring for me. I know that wasn't what the intention was, but when we think of it that way, the geography of the mouth is less important than what its physicality is, and then it goes more into a maybe metaphysical realm of how we imagine the river's language, which is, I think, intuitive. We can't really understand the river in terms of its way it translates to us because it doesn't really speak English or use mouths like we do. But I think we intuitively know when we go to it what it says, because it will reveal on ourselves things about us maybe we need to see or hear. But it won't come through our ears, it'll come in our hearts. So that's the image. The image actually comes from just looking at ripples and bubbles of water. And then behind that, in the painting, is a picture of my, I'll say, Stewin, who is non-binary. And so we say Stewin, it's the downriver dialect word in Hunkaminam for niece or nephew. They didn't gender the concept of for niece or nephew. It was just that you're Stewin. So one day they were just playing in this bucket and they got stuck in the bucket. They were cooling themselves off in the water. And I just love that they got stuck in the water, but they're in this bucket. And at one point there's a video of it, but they were crawling on the ground trying to get it off. And I'm just laughing. I'm not helping them, sadly. So I'm sad for them. And it looked like a snail with this bucket. And I called it the they-them spirit bath because I don't think water has a gender. I don't think, I like to consider myself non-binary as well. And it was important for me to have an experience of spirit bathing that's, for one, not necessarily in a river, to sort of show the fluidity and the freedom and liberatory nature of water, but also to sort of just play with the idea of gender, because my Steven was only about 10 years old when they identified themselves as being non-binary, and we were all very inspired by their courage and confidence to do that. So I wanted to sort of play with that. Plus, I just think putting they, them on anything is funny. Thank you.
Manny.
Oh, I have more.
Oh yeah, go for it.
Sorry, I have more. Okay, so I got to explain. It's really, okay, there's a lot of layers to the work, literally and metaphysically and metaphorically. When I shared this work at the opening, I wanted to share that Auntie Mary Point said that she really liked the imagery of clouds in this context because it exemplifies a story with the Coast Salish story that we all descended from the clouds. And Hals, the transformer, eventually turned some of us people into plants, animals, and even rocks. And that shows how we're all interrelated as beings on this earth. And yeah, I just wanted to share the significance of the cloud imagery as well. It's also in the blankets, I'll say too. So the blankets, a lot of the time, are referencing clouds. So I was told by Auntie Mary as well, when we have our blankets on the floor, we're trying to lift people up, we're thinking of lifting them up on a cloud of the woven blanket. I'm not sure how true that is. That's just a story I heard. I'll cite Auntie Mary.
Awesome. Thank you, Manny. Yeah, I think the next question I'd really love to ask Sydney is to talk about the use of hide and skin in your work. And, you know, I'd love to ask everybody about the materials that you all work with, but maybe we'll start with Sydney and your use of hide and skin.
What comes to mind is when I moved here to Vancouver in 2018, my cousin Talon Pascal, who was around 12 at the time, he was learning to tan hides, and I was just felt called to and was so impressed that this little guy was tanning hides, and it became an excuse for me to go home. And then it just turned into a love for working with these materials. It really gave me the time and space to work with a material work with the animals that come from the area, and think time is different when we're working with the process. And for me, it was interesting to think about how this material was used in the past as like a form of survival. We were making it to be clothed and to be sheltered, and now that's not really necessary. And even though it's a sustainable and beautiful practice, now I'm using it in art. And it was just a funny thing that I think about. And for me, it was a way, like, I imagine giving this animal like one more life through telling a story before it goes back. And I loved incorporating them to my work because I've only done brain tanning and smoking it, and so it really emits that smoky smell, and I find that's an interesting a sense to trigger for people because it brings a lot of memory, whereas I play with like a lot of sound and video as well in my work, but sense of smell was like an interesting thing to hear what memories it brought out for people. And so, what was I thinking about before? Yeah, really my love for using this material started with my cousin. And even though he was 12 at the time, he really went all out that he would make his own clothing. So he made his own traditional garments and wear them to school every day, no matter what people said. He was trying to be as traditional as he could, to the point where he was asking my uncle if he could have a horse to take him to school instead of him being driven to school. And we're like, well, I don't think there's anywhere to put the horse, but we can't do that. So he's just a really incredible being. And it really inspired me to use this work, and then to even move into working with animals like from the water, and how just giving them to me like one more journey.
Awesome. And Grace, I know that your work in this show is a painting, but I've seen that you've been doing some other media work, like your MFA show installation. If you'd like to talk about the different materials that you work with.
Okay. I think I'm like a self-taught artist, so anything art related that I know came from just like school and just things that I saw. And growing up, I found that painting was such a amusing and playful medium to work with, and just being able to like move the canvas anywhere that I wanted to kind of work in. There's like, my parents like to talk about how there's been so many like paint marks on our dining table back home. And I unfortunately also like got paint all over my like bedroom floor, the walls, everywhere. So it's very easy for me. I love painting. I love mixing colors, and just kind of also figuring out how to do that with form lines is really interesting. A lot of my practice kind of builds from there, and always being willing to learn something new or learn new techniques that can build up my understanding of paint. But in relation to like changing mediums and materials, I did kind of go more sculptural during my MFA, and it was just an opportunity to explore materials that I've never like gotten to like get my hands on. I come from such a small community, and so it's a little bit harder to be able to find people to teach you new ways and new things. So thank you to the AGP. They taught me so many cool new things, and just all the people that I met at Emily Carr also helped kind of push me into like a more sculptural sense. But when I was thinking about the work that I wanted to put into this show, I had to kind of contemplate the fact that although I had a studio space, I feel a lot more kind of comfortable creating at home. And so, and also just thinking about kind of public interaction. There was like a few times during my MFA and during the shows that some of the items that were a little bit more sculptural were kind of touched or played with without my knowledge. And so just knowing that there's going to be so many people going through these spaces, I wanted to ensure that whatever I was bringing into the space wasn't going to be kind of misused or taken advantage of. I always believe that the materials that are, I don't know, cultural or have significance, you know, have their own mind, their own spirit, and so that they need to be protected as well. And I bring those teachings into like my paintings a lot of the time. But for me, when it came to this painting, it was a lot about what am I sharing with the public, but also what is my own comfort level that I wanted to kind of work with. So yeah, it was a lot easier to transport, even though it's quite large. But yeah, I think that for me, painting will always be my favorite outlet when it comes to art. And I just love, like, it's still very tactile, and I get so messy. You look down at the paint, and it kind of reminded me of like that feeling of having fish guts on your hands too. So yeah, it's really interesting, and sometimes you just continue to carry on those marks on your body or the clothes or on the walls. So yeah.
Awesome, thank you. And maybe Manny next, if you'd like to speak about the materials that you work with. And I know that like in some of your recent work and in the show that this piece was from as well, you had some really interesting mixed media pieces. I know that you've worked with like found object sculpture before. I'd really love to hear about that side of your work as well.
Yeah, I work with all sorts of materials. So there's photography, there's painting, there's sculptural, architectural installations made of wood, there's 3D printed sculptures, there's laser etching on various different materials. Soapstone carving as well as part of the 3D printing process is a very fun idea. I love working with plants. I think as I was listening to this conversation and hearing you speak, I started to imagine not necessarily the physical materials that we work with, but the memories as the materials we work with, or even beyond that as the relationships we carry between each other as significant materials that we as humans work with all the time. So the space in between us or between all of you is equally as important as the wood, the water, the air. And I think when we have that connection, we can respect the materials that we work with in a deeper way. I think for this one, though, this painting and this image, the material that I'm more interested in is the relationships that were built. The conversations with my dad and hearing how he used to have a passion for photography. As a longshoreman, he would just take pictures. And then a funny story is that relationship led to me having conversations with my mom and my aunt, who also claimed to have a love for photography and claimed ownership over different photos, to the point where they couldn't remember who took the photos. And then I'm trying to credit, and I couldn't just give it to one, so I had to credit all of them.
Awesome.
Or like that beautiful moment between me and my stew and saucesse. They're just playing outside a hot day, and they're just laughing in water with a bucket stuck on their ass. Those materials are more exciting than, the means of paint on a canvas. I like to imagine that my grandfather, who was Irish, or maybe that part of me that my grandma from Squamish First Nation, she was part Chilean and probably had some Spanish ancestry, connects me to oil paint in some weird, convoluted way. I also just like painting. But important, what I really, in terms of materiality, maybe even beyond the artistic world I'm imagining, is that a phrase that was shared to me was, everything is medicine if you know how to use it. And what I mean by that is everything, and my mom shares this too, is there for us if we need it. And she says that plants have a greater emotional intelligence that humans can comprehend. Now that we know science is, starting to understand the way plants interact with each other as a form of intelligence, my mom has always told me, the plants will just take care of you in ways you won't be able to understand. And I always found that very beautiful. And I think about the exhibition at Richmond or at the Polygon or at other places where I've had plants as a part of the installation. Part of that process is going to the plants and asking for their permission. They will say yes. But I always go with the intention of, what am I asking for? How can this help? And so with Richmond, I went to Iona Beach. The Point family, a long time ago, was mostly in Richmond. And I went to all the wildflowers, and their beauty spoke to me. And so I said, please help me. There's so much suffering in the world right now. I need your help. And I need your help showing people to let their guards down a little bit and remember to love each other. And it was strange because physically the impact that had on my body, I remember carrying, it was almost like I started to feel like the plants, cutting them hurt. I could hear like a scream in my head. And then I remember after the show being like, oh, I'm so tired. And I couldn't tell if I was tired, if it was just like, oh, I kind of asked the plants for too much. But that's a little bit about materials.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. What you said about the loose connection to oil painting, it reminded me of when I was at Emily Carr, and I showed up in my MFA program having practiced art for like 1 year and just wanting to experiment and try all these different things. And so I naturally ended up doing a bunch of paintings. And so I presented these paintings in a crit, and my studio prof said to me, oh, your work is in dialogue with this German painter from the 1970s that I'd never heard of before. And I was like, oh no, now it is, because I know who that artist is. And just the ways that, like, as Indigenous artists, we get tied into this whole history of Western art, and it's kind of a choice, we all absolutely, we work in relationship with what we've seen, with what we talk about. But then, as you were saying, I think it's much more interesting to think about the relationships that we have with each other and with our identities and our cultures and the places that we come from. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And James, I really want to ask you about your work in public art and that aspect of your practice. And, we were kind of talking about this yesterday. We had coffee yesterday and we're talking about this. But really, like, I'm so interested in your perspective on the role that public art can play for the work that you want to share, and like the opportunities, I think, that are presented through sharing our work in public and in specific places. Like there's gallery settings, there's public settings. Like what do you think about the role and the opportunity that public art can play?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, I think maybe just to backpedal a little bit, just to kind of add into this, because this is one of the challenges I've always had with material in public space, is that it's really driven by Western, like, we need insurance, therefore, if we're gonna have this thing up, it needs to last X amount of years. And so right away, materials that we would use traditionally outdoors, like cedar carvings, for example, are just kind of like off the table, unless you find a unique project where they're willing to just take that on as a more traditional project, so to speak, when we're talking about totem poles or house posts. Yeah, I mean, the role of public art, the part of the reason I just I touched on it earlier, was that I just noticed this very there's just a lack of our identity in our territory, and I was just always interested in working through red and yellow cedar as like a way of realizing form through like small maquettes and models, because to kind of speak to what Manny was saying, just all like the energy that you pick up through the memory of material is so important. It's like ingrained in us as Indigenous people that we have this inherent understanding of this connection. And I feel like I wouldn't have to explain it to you. I wouldn't have to explain it to you, but like to the rest of the world, it seems like we have to twist people's arms to like understand this point of view when it's so important to us, and like it's just like in our DNA, man. I don't have any other way to explain it, but it's there, and that process of revealing material over time, thinking about the taking away of material that is to exist or not exist, the space between the space and the non-space. I'm so interested in that conversation of like you're revealing what is already there, or thinking about how form can inform another form. Those are just like really interesting things that I want to like pursue. But like to answer your question more about like the public sculpture, public art, it was kind of like a mix of both, because I wanted to see more of our identity on our territory, but what did that mean for me to be doing that in a more contemporary way? Like how I think it was like a huge risk for me in the beginning to like start to apply it. Like actually the first piece that I got that was like really fully who I felt who I was as an artist, I was terrified to present that concept because I thought that they just wouldn't pick it, right? There was still this pressure that they were taking me in or hiring me as an artist because we have this sense of like this traditional sense of this style of work or this expectation of this style of work. So when I had my first piece, and that was actually the Port Moody piece, Chewicum, the blue mussel shells, that's what really changed the trajectory for me. Is like, okay, maybe I can kind of like deconstruct these forms, reconstruct them in my own way, my own artistic expression. And it's still Salish, it's still my identity. And who's to say that I can't do it this way, that I kind of, this inherent thing that I want to explore. And I think that's where the conversation started changing, especially when it comes to public art and things that people have to live with every day. Is I was interested in that conversation is like people are forced to live with these every day. And if they are living with them every day, they slowly get to learn a little bit more every time they walk past that piece. And to me, that was one of the most powerful things because it's doing that work every day. And every time I put up a new piece, I realize it's giving that power back a little bit more every time. And I also believe, like we should be in the most prominent places in the city, in our territory, because we're on this journey of reclaiming this identity, building ourselves back up, and being the proudest part of our society. Like we should be in the proudest parts of our society, and that's often why I say like this isn't just us. It's like us as Indigenous people working towards this goal. It should be everybody, because it's not just our history. It's everybody's history who's living here on this territory. So yeah, public art has always been kind of like so much like that deep meaning for me in that way. I realized the importance of that work because it wasn't just I was competing against other Indigenous people too for the same space. I was competing against people from all around the world for spaces where we have deep history, deep connection to place. And if I hadn't won those bids, that history is getting erased. And that's where I realized that work is so important, that we need to put more of that time and resources into that. And that's also why like the whole tradition, like how the Western world has sort of set up this way of acquiring public artworks and portfolios of various artists is problematic in that regard too, because you think about it all across North America, all across Turtle Island, every Indigenous group across Turtle Island has their own stories of their history and land. And yeah, I think it's just like we're only just getting started in this kind of whole conversation about this, and I think it's still hard for a lot of people to open those doors. But every project is kind of like a little bit of a win, so that's kind of, yeah, how I think about it.
Awesome, thank you. And the next question I'd like to kind of open for anyone to answer. What would you like to see or hope to see coming from Salish art and Salish artists over the next few years or in the future? Yeah.
Can I go first? Are you sure? I don't want to take up too much space. I really want to see the policing of what we consider to be a Salish visual language to end. I want Salish art to be free, because I think that's kind of how our culture has existed for a long time. I think, again, that's why there's so many people from across the globe that are here. I really just want artists to feel free and not be subjected to the same ridicule or expectations of what we police as Salish art to exist anymore. I respect so much the tradition that has gotten us to this point, and understand the importance of identifying and cementing what we consider to be the Salish visual language. I just can't enforce or allow the policing of anything to exist, especially when it comes to art. So when I hear, growing up, what I heard a lot was how I should be making work. It often felt stifling of creativity. It wasn't liberatory. It didn't bring a sense of liberation within my heart. What brought that was me just kind of having to figure out my own thing. And I think that's what we all want, essentially, is to be free. I also want to see how we consider land to be symbolized in new ways. So I say that in the sense that I want us to start imagining collectively, not only as artists, understanding that every single thing comes from the land, and that we all carry that with us because we are a part of it. And so I want the respect and responsibility that was, that sense of responsibility of that we all are this land across the globe, even, to exist. Because I imagine in the future, we will be off this planet. There's already conversations of AI data centers in space and all sorts of crazy things. And I want the understanding and intelligence that Indigenous people bring to go into that future, so that when we embark into space, which is such a crazy thought, that we have this understanding of Indigenous intelligence carried with us there. And what that might look at, and this is so crazy, I'm gonna go there. When we have a being like the sun, I want us to start to question and understand, how do we get the sun's consent to harvest its energy? How do we have a relationship with the sun? And how do we imagine that in the future is something we have to get consent from? It's a little delulu. These are just my thoughts. I know it's like, I'm like, you're just asking, like, what do you imagine for Salish art? And I'm like, well, we got to understand what the sun is saying first.
That's great.
But also in the micro, that's the macro. The micro, I want to see how Salish artists will have representations of the micro world. With advancements in technology, we now have a visual lexicon of understandings of things we've never been able to comprehend. I want to see how Salish artists will take that knowledge, which is very valuable and compelling, and I want to see what we do with that. So I want to see little atoms and molecules in Salish art. I think we intuitively all have the intelligence of those things existing before colonization, but now I want to see, that's what I want to see. I want to see these like crazy advancements in technology reflected in our visual culture as well.
Do you have to go? I don't know. I guess I'll just jump off of that point because I was actually thinking about not exactly what you said. I'm like, I had the same thoughts about the sun. But no, like for me, just thinking about where I'm at in my practice and like where a lot of like present like Coast Salish artists are is like they are pushing the boundaries of what Coast Salish formline is at the moment. And it's really fun because I feel like we get to be very playful in what we're doing and what we're representing, and it's so much fun. Like I'm having so much fun playing with form lines. But just thinking about what I'm basing my knowledge of form lines on is like really like the last, 20 years of what I've seen of artists doing and what's happening now. Like I really wonder how much further artists are going to be pushing form lines in the future. It's going to be so interesting what we're going to be seeing. And I think for me, I just really want to see I want to see so much more Indigenous youth getting to play with form lines, getting to just express themselves without kind of being scared to jump into that pool of like visual arts. So yeah, I just hope for the best for our youth.
I guess for me, I'm just thinking in the context of bringing land-based material practices into spaces and how that experience has been for me, and how for me it was like really a way to understand more deeply our relationships with animals and the land. And it was just interesting to hear the pushback or the misunderstanding of what this material was used for. Because for me, when I get to learn these practices, it's like I'm delving into a world that like no longer exists or that I'll never be able to experience. And I think they're important practices to learn to have these better relationships with one another and the land, and as a way that these sustainable practices could help us move forward in a better way, and to have pushback where people are even like, how could you use a material that was once a being, and not really fully understanding what our relationships to these animals are and how we honor them by using these materials, or for me, processing it and telling another story. And despite that, like there's always going to be different perspectives with using these materials, and that's okay, but I would hate for like one comment to like deter an Indigenous artist from wanting to bring these practices into these institutional spaces. And I think I just want them to have no fear in bringing in our practices and taking these spaces. Yeah.
What was the question again?
What would you like to see for the future of Salish art and artists?
The future of...
Yeah, what would you like or hope to see in the future?
What would I love to see in the future? Well, I think it all kind of, I mean, this is kind of where I'm at now with my practice, is like public art is still ultimately controlled by people in spaces that may not necessarily have Indigenous voices at the top of their agenda. And I think I've kind of realized that through working through a lot of this, because a lot of the time I have to work through different levels of city and government and relationship building with people on a more corporate level. And I think I've kind of realized that there is, at least locally, there is kind of like a cap on this way of thinking. I think there's this resistance that people are scared to adapt because once they open the floodgates, they're afraid of what happens. And I think that we need to realize that it's not that scary as Canadians. I speak specifically to Canadians, like Vancouver, I think is way further ahead than Toronto or other cities, because we've had such a beautiful vast of art to inspire everybody here. They feel this deep sense of spiritual connection when they move here. Like you were saying, like people move here from all over the world. They feel this deep connection to nature and culture, because there's so much of it. There's so beautiful. But the thing is that like it's still kind of through the eyes or the lens of the Western way of doing things. And, part of at least my work, and I hope that it's doing some positive change around that, is convincing people that it isn't something you have to be afraid of. And that's one of the biggest questions. That's what I've been going over to talking to architecture firms for the last 2-3 years now, trying to just tell them, hey, let's collaborate, let's work together in building this city, thinking 150 years from now, what do we want this city to look like? If we don't start now, I may not be around to see it the way that I'd love to see it, but thinking 7 generations ahead, it's like entering that mentality to people. It's a way of life, it's a way of thinking. It was ingrained in how we always ensured that the next 7 generations have what we have, but we also want our young children to feel identified on their own territory. And how do you do that? Well, it's what everybody is referring to as placemaking or city building, or everything that we're building around in our cities and our infrastructure. It should be in every facet of that society. And I'm hoping that through not just public art, but art and culture, city building, urban building, that just open up and realize that there could be a bright future to our art and our culture. And so like you're saying, yeah, let's I was gonna well, I was gonna refer back to the sun and harness that energy of the sun. But you know, I think I think that we're at the very beginning of this journey of people really finally starting to open up and understand our ways of thinking and our design language. And it's also a very exciting place to be, but it's also a scary place to be because it's uncharted territory, and we're kind of making it up as we go along the way as well. And but I think that's where a lot of exciting things can happen, and as David Bowie said. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. And 10 minutes? Okay. Yeah. So, and kind of not to answer my own question, because that really great question actually came from Alia about the future of Salish art. But, one thing that I really hope is to continue to see more unity as Salish peoples, and to see more Salish artists coming together. And that, I feel like we've really struggled with division in the Salish world, where we have the Canada-US border that has cut our world in half. Basically, we've been disconnected from each other in that way, and in so many different ways. The kind of the Indian Act governance structure. These are ways that our ancestors did not live in relation with each other. And I really hope that we continue to see unity as Salish people, and that we continue to come together and to see what stories come from that, and to see the stories that artists are going to be telling. I'm really excited about that. And that the biggest thing for me is that all of our art is stories and storytelling, and our voices matter, and our stories need to be heard. And so I'm really excited for what the future has in terms of seeing the art and stories that'll be shared. And so I think that's kind of a good point to open it up to question and answer. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody has any questions, but I'm happy to come to you if you want to speak to the mic.
There has to be a question. At least one. There we go. Thank you, Tanya.
Everybody think of your question.
Well, I was thinking, as a Salish artist, I'm Secwepemc on my dad's side, and on my mom's side, I'm settler Canadian. And so I really enjoyed the discussion and looking into and thinking about the erasure that's happened, all the ways in which Salish art, both Coast Salish and Interior Salish, have been sort of written out of any art histories, and sort of structurally sort of and systemically disadvantaged compared to other kinds of Indigenous art, potentially in our areas. And a lot of that is through the anthropological record, and a lot of that is through kind of how colonists and settlers experienced our art practices, and then or didn't, There were only sort of accessing some areas and others not. And so it's created this really fractured picture of Salish art. So really exciting show to see, people working in different mediums from different nations come together and start to explore those languages. But I think my question is around, calling for unity within Salish art practice, and then how maybe artists have experienced that sort of holdover from anthropology, that holdover of ways in which Salish art has been diminished. Was it too large of a question? Sorry.
You guys like to take this one?
I mean, I was just talking with Eliot yesterday about this. Specifically too, there wasn't like a whole lot for us to go off of in terms of research behind museums and collections across the world that's spread out all over the place. But particularly just, yeah, I don't know. Like we were speaking yesterday about how, oh man, it's just kind of left my mind all of a sudden for a second. But I don't know if you guys want to maybe answer that in a different way. But while I kind of think about it.
Okay, well, I'll fill the air. Well, I think I want to identify currently the Salish people. Salish is an anglicized term for a language group that Jeanette Armstrong has called the Salishan. It's about 23 to 26 different languages that go, it's most of BC and then also parts of Washington State. So it's geographically a very large area we're referring to, first and foremost. And what Jeanette Armstrong I've heard also say is that historically, the Salish people here, all 23 to 26 different language groups, so like all over the province and into Washington State, is historically the most peaceful place on earth. And I think to this day, that is still true. I think all of you are nodding, realizing where we are and what's happening in the world, and can see that. And so I think the concept of unity historically has deep roots here in forms of reciprocity, peaceful exchange, I would say humor, as well as cultural ubiquitous across the Salish people that goes pretty far. And that general, I would say, egalitarian sense of governance. And I think that governance system is reflected in our landscapes. You know, there's such a vast array of landscapes in BC. All this to say is that the way that our environment has shaped us is of utmost importance historically in forming that unity. And just like the geography of this place being vast and diverse, the people will reflect that as being vast and diverse, and having that respect for each other is what brings that unity. But I think that the environment we live in shapes that sense of unity. I don't know if that answers your question.
Yeah, no, the question, yeah, it's just like, it's not really a question that has an answer, but it's like a reflection. And I think those are all things I think about all the time, the kind of materials that we didn't have to start from, or what we do have to access, and how that, yeah, is applies to us over such a huge area and so many different languages, cultures, practices.
I still don't remember what I was going to say.
That's the mic.
You don't have any?
I don't know. I'm kind of just reflecting on my own experiences and knowledge at the moment with that question. And I think for me, as just like an experience of being a young Indigenous kid trying to get into like the arts and trying to find an outlet that can connect me to my culture, for me, I used to sit in my grandmother's house and recreate the Indigenous art that she had in her home. And a lot of it was not exactly Coast Salish. And so my only outlet was of other Indigenous cultures, form lines, and visual languages. And so there was a time where I did feel kind of lost and disconnected from my own Coast Salish culture and heritage, because I didn't visually see myself anywhere that was kind of either commercially or just locally, because there was kind of a desaturation. There wasn't a lot of Coast Salish stuff around me. And so there was even moments as like a young artist where I had to step back and realize like, okay, I'm not doing myself any help with what I'm kind of going with visually. And I stepped back and I looked to like around me really and tried my best to find artists that I felt reflected Coast Salish teachings. And at that time, as like a teenager, Eliot was actually one of those artists that I saw locally that was kind of bringing Coast Salish art to the mainstream. And so that was very fun for me to experience as well. And I think when it comes to where I'm at now with how I present my work and understanding that people are going to come into Indigenous art with their own kind of preconceived notions, it is the way that I'm kind of working with storytelling through form lines that I don't want to give away everything. I'm trying my best to create kind of more of like a sensation feeling through my art, because I do want to keep everything that I know about my own culture and my own stories to myself. And I just want people to have like maybe an outlet to be like, is that a fish head? Like, what is that person kind of like notioning towards? Like, so yeah, I hope that's my understanding of that question.
I was just thinking, because I just got back from getting a travel scholarship to go to New York to the American Museum of Natural History to visit the collection from the interior and the coast there, and just like realizing like the lack of visual language of our culture that I had growing up, so not really knowing the visuals and like our designs, and kind of being afraid to touch those in my work sometimes, and how having to kind of take it upon yourself to go visit these places and remember these designs and ways of making. And it also made me think of a friend of mine, Dion Kazas, who's in Kuklapmuk, who did a lot of work visiting all these museums all over the world and collecting and drawing all the designs to create a book that could be shared with his people so they didn't have to do that work themselves, and what we can do to give access to our people who might not have these opportunities to go travel and visit our items. And then it just also makes me realize that, and my cousin told me this when I was thinking of some new work, that like we can't be afraid to like imagine and like come up with our own ways in representing where we come from. We can't always hold on to these certain aspects and designs from the past. We're allowed to interpret them and in the way we see our own place, and how they can transform as time moves on and be able to express ourselves in different ways.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me personally, I really think about the way that my own art practice began. And it was with the passing of my late great-grandmother, Dr. Ellen White-Kwulasultun. And she was just such an incredible knowledge keeper and storyteller and linguist and healer, and she did everything, you know. And just when she passed, I realized how much knowledge went with her, and you know how much more work I have to do to be that kind of person that she was. And so I just really started trying to learn. I started studying Hulkaminam language. I started studying Salish culture and art, and you know, reading the anthropological texts, which are, you know, unfortunately one of the major resources that we have, because so many of our cultural belongings, so much of our material has been removed, as Sydney was saying, has been removed from our communities, and we no longer have access to. And as I did that work, I realized how many of these barriers exist in the way of us accessing knowledge about ourselves. And so I think that such a critical piece of the work is for us as Salish peoples sharing those stories ourselves and using our own voice, and that, you know, we have to take the authorship back from the anthropological or Western lens and do this work in our own way. And like I was saying with the unity side, like one thing that I really struggled with in describing Salish art is that so often I found myself focusing on what Salish art isn't. Like I say, it's not formline, it's not Northern art style, it's not this, it's not that. And one thing that I really appreciate that Alia and I wanted to focus on with this show was celebrating what we share and what we have in common and the similarities that we have from the coast to the interior, and the similarities that we have culturally, and linguistically, and there are so many. And to really emphasize that, I think that that's such meaningful work. And, with our art, to really I think it's important to look at where we come from, but then not to be prescriptive about what the future holds, or that we have to make art one way or another, but to understand the ground that we stand on and that our ancestors left for us, and the languages that have been passed down to us. And I feel like every time that I get to spend time with one of our ancestral pieces of Salish art and reconnect, I'm learning something new about who we are, And every time that a new piece of Salish art is made, that's contributing to our collective understanding about who we are. And that's just such meaningful work. And I really want to hold my hands up to the artists here, because these artists are doing that work. And they're doing it in their own ways, and they're doing it across all these different mediums and different places. And it's just so exciting to see. I really want to hold my hands up to all of you. And I really want to hold my hands up to all of you who came tonight and shared words with us and had listened to what we had to say. Thank you all.